Dear Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for Sabbath and for the meetings. Thank you for waking me up in time to do this since I was so tired this afternoon. Must be the booster shot I got yesterday. And pray that you'll be with us this afternoon. Be with me as I attempt to present this material on Acts 27 today, on the birth and the growth of the internet and all the things associated with it and the people who are involved in it, which is a fascinating subject. I pray that we'll all walk away from this much better review of this information so that we can present it to other people and at least understand how we got to where we are today. And we know that you enabled all of this to happen for our benefit primarily. The rest of the world has gotten plenty of use out of it, for better or for worse. And pray you'll help my energy level to stay up for the rest of the afternoon. And please prepare us for the week ahead, that we can possibly be a witness to others if called to be and if need be. Prepare us for what's going to happen soon with the Levites. And just thankful that for the Sabbath and for the time to rest and to recuperate. We thank you, Lord, for hearing and answering my prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. I'll pull this thing up. What I'm doing here. Okay, gotta do that. I have to remember hide floating. Okay. This is number 7 of the series that Elder Tess did on Acts 27. And I'm not on the right page. Hold on. Oh, okay. New mode of warfare. April 2019. Okay.
Do you want
to
get in slideshow mode, or it doesn't matter if you want it this way?
I don't know what's best.
It's what works best for you. To me, it seems easier to just click your mouse and you go to the next page, but it's whatever works for you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll do that.
There you go.
There we go. All right. Okay, and here's the chart that I think it was Christine went over the other day. Wednesday it was. Detailing the pattern, failure and success. And so far we have covered Acts 27 in 3 presentations where we laid out the history of both ships. This study then took us to a study of the King of the South. We drew some other lessons. We talked about the 5th line, judgment on the structures or the institutions, We're going to come back to specific points of that study, particularly 1863, where everything goes wrong. But the real purpose was to head into a study of the King of the South. So we took the number 273 and we began to study the South. It took us to the history of Pyrrhus. And that was what our subject matter was in our last study. In Elder Parminder's class, he has been expanding on the concept of an alpha and omega, how we construct those. We are already familiar with them just in our study of Millerite history. Even on that level, I think everyone understands that we are repeating Millerite history. But to say that it's a repeat and to leave it at that level, it becomes a little too simple. And the problem with too simple is you can draw some wrong conclusions. So we're going to cover some Millerite history and explain that concept. But to remind us, we have a history of failure and a history of success. And this is one pattern by bringing it into God's people. It would say beginning and end of ancient Israel. Here we could say the beginning and the end of the King of the South. But it's the same concept. And then we come into this history, and it's the beginning and the end for the King of the South, but on another level. Another perspective. World War II and our history. USSR and Russia against Germany and the United States. The papacy was involved in the history of World War II, and it's involved in our history. We laid it out in this manner to make a specific point. When we come to parable teaching, we take a story and line it up with another story. And we compare and contrast, and that's what we've done. So we've compared them, and we're going to learn from each one of these battles. Ipsis is going to teach us of 2016. Oops, just lost my place. And Heraclea is going to teach us of 2018. August 1940 is going to teach us of 2018. But we can't just take August 1940 as a waymark and drop it into our history. The reason why we can't do that is because this is the history of a failure. You can see that with Panium. We cannot take this dynamic of the King of the South coming against the King of the North and the King of the South winning and dropping that into Panium. And why can't we do that? Because one is success and one is failure. And we know at Panium, the King of the North wins, not the King of the South. So when we study 2018, which we will do, we need to remember this concept: lines of success and failure. When we study August 1940, it's going to teach us that there are some things that need to change. The King of the South is the initiator of this conflict, and in our line, we're to look for the conflict begun by the King of the North. And then at the end, instead of looking for a victory of the King of the North, we have to look for a victory of the King of the South. So we have to change these concepts, and that's how we are going to study the King of the South. But we need to take these lessons and not say that's all well and good, but rather learn from them. Because there's people in the movement taking Millerite history, taking a waymark and just dropping them wholesale into our history. And if people are not aware of what they're doing and the rules they're breaking, it looks deceptively accurate. Now I would suggest it's dangerous. We can't drop them from failure to success. We're going to discuss Millerite history another time. It becomes a little bit more complicated to know now where to approach this subject because everything becomes connected. Any subject we pick is interconnected with another. So we'll introduce this thought by considering another rule, and that is connecting our waymarks. If we were to go to Millerite history and we were to consider 1844, we would consider April 19th. We talk about July 21, we would talk about August 1st, August 15th, and October 22nd, 1844. These are waymarks in Millerite history. And what did the Millerites need to do to accurately go through this history? To navigate it safely, they had to go through each waymark, following the growth and development of an internal message. They had to walk in step with that message as it grew and developed. So there is an internal message inside the movement that they must walk in step with to go through safely. If we were to take that to our reform line, there is a difference. We come to April 19th, and it's 9/11, or 2001. And July 21 is 2014, and August 1 is 2016, August 15th is 2018, and October 22nd is 2019. Even if you're not entirely sure how we come to those years, I just want to state it now to make a point. In 2001, what must you have to successfully pass that waymark? There's an internal message developing in this time period, but that isn't enough. With Millerite history, it's internal growth of the message. But when you come to 2001, what did you need to see? It wasn't just an internal message. Now you need to see external events connected to that internal message. So you need to see 2001. We're going to have a message about the woes developed. There's going to be more of an increase of knowledge, but you needed to see an external event. 9/11, 2014, Sunday law. There's an internal message that we must walk in step with. There's external events that we must also connect to it. 2016, there's an internal message on the King of the South, but there's an external event in the US. Trump's election, and we must connect the internal with the external. 2018, we have a battle, Heraclea. It connects to our internal message, 2019. Our October 22 to 44 is connected to external events. So compared to Millerite history, our reform line has another layer, and that is these external events that we must connect to come to 2019 and accurately predict what it's going to look like. What we need to do to predict it is make sure that these external events are being accurately traced. You cannot accept 2014 if you haven't seen 2001. So what is required of you is to take these external events and connect them. They must tell a story, a development. I'm going to explain what this looks like. And I just recently began to understand what she meant by threading a needle. After all this time, through these studies, that everything further on down the line has to somehow be connected to the origin, the very beginning.
Always good to hear we're learning something.
Yeah, I just would be so confused. Like, what is she talking about? Threading a needle? Why? I couldn't grasp what she was getting at back in the day.
The event has to be traced through every waymark.
Yeah.
The thing that you're talking about has to be able to be thread through, visible.
Related. Has to be related somehow.
Yeah.
We come to this history, 2016 and forward. Here. And what people are saying, what they begin to understand is that the King of the South is coming back into history, and there's going to be two battles. Raphia and Panium. People understand there's going to be two battles in our history, and then they start to consider what this is going to look like. So they're studying ancient battles and warfare, and they bring that into our history, and they expect a hot war. Yes, we did. People start buying up food. They moved into the country if they're not already there, preparing to lose their jobs. We're planning for people being forced into the army. There's going to be this massive war between Russia and the United States, and they're expecting all of that to start at Raphia. They don't have a date yet, but they're expecting this event. I would suggest why we did that is because we didn't connect our waymarks. Way back. People did not watch the relationship develop between Putin and the West from his election in 1999. They did not connect those waymarks and see what was actually occurring. 2014, 2016 gave us all we needed to know about what that war looked like. But people were not following the external events accurately, so they cut this rope and ignored what it looked like in that history. I don't know, she's talking about this right here. Let's see. And started expecting some type of nuclear strike. What we need to do is connect our waymarks and go back to the time of the end, 1989 to 91. We teach in this movement everything that we need to know is encapsulated in this time period. That this increase of knowledge is everything that we expand on or add to as this internal message is developed. What we haven't done is take that concept to the external events. We take 1989 to 1991 and take it back to Millerite history, 1798 to 1918. There's increase of knowledge, and what is William Miller saying? 1818, he says that in about 25 years, Christ is going to come back. And then all they do after 1818 is begin to share and add to that original message. But everything for the message is there in the beginning. He has done his study. Now it just gets expanded. So 1989 and 91, the study of Daniel 11:40, and everything that we're looking at in these presentations, the King of the South, is just in that one verse, because we are living in that verse and still walking through Daniel 11:40, and the internal message is encapsulated in that increase of knowledge. So this is the story of our increase of knowledge, time of the end. And right now I'm thinking about all the stuff that was studied in between. I mean, in the time I came into the message, 2008, what he was, what Jeff was, delving into at that time period. And then as the years went on, we were just going all through the Bible, gathering up little bits and pieces of this and that and the other thing, and fractals and 2520 and 126, 151. And we had to gather up all that manna, called the hidden manna, in order to be ready to jump right back into Daniel 11:40 again at the end of it all. Are there any questions or any comments at this point? When we come to external events and we want to know what these battles look like, what much of this looks like, we need to consider the external. And in 1989, a lot more happened than the fall of the Berlin Wall. So much happened in that year that Time magazine 20 years later wrote a book about 1989 listing everything that happened in that year. They recognized that it was a turning point in history. The fall of the Berlin Wall was just a couple of pages in that book, because there's a lot more we can trace back to connect to 1989. If we're going to consider war between the King of the South and the King of the North, we want to know what that looks like. We need to take our thread back into these histories. We won't go through that in these studies, but it's worth looking at to consider the Cold War. Go back before 1989. Just one thing about the Cold War. Why was it a Cold War? They came up with that acronym, MAD, mutually assured destruction. The point behind this phrase is to say that it would be mad for there to be a hot war between the King of the North and the King of the South, because for the US to attack the USSR or the USSR to attack the US would be mutually assured destruction. The USA attacks the USSR with a nuclear weapon. Before that bomb hit, the USSR would release their own. And both countries would be decimated. So to strike your enemy was an act of suicide, and they called that mad. And that is the 46-year-old Cold War. There's a little thing on the bottom. It's a doctrine. MAD is a doctrine of military strategy and national security policy in which a full-scale use of nuclear weapons by two or more opposing sides would cause the complete annihilation of both the attacker and the defender. See preemptive nuclear strike and second strike. It is based on the theory of deterrence, which holds that the threat of using strong weapons against the enemy prevents the enemy's use of those same weapons. Strategy is a form of Nash equilibrium in which, once armed, neither side has any incentive to initiate a conflict or to disarm. Makes me think of certain Hollywood movies that came up with that same conclusion way back in the 80s. That it was like the movie War Games, where the computer itself figured out that it was a waste of time to start thermonuclear war. And I just wish that it stuck in my head better. And I'm not sure, I don't remember how much I worried about Cold War up until 1989. But it was always in the back of our heads, I guess, those of us who are old enough to remember. So coming to our time and that dynamic, did that dynamic change at all? No, we don't talk about it like they did in the Cold War. That dynamic has not changed. So what they had to do is develop a new mode of warfare. We come to 1989 to 91, and now there is a new problem for the King of the South. After 1991, it goes from a communist economy to a Western-style capitalist economy. All of the government-owned infrastructure is sold at an extremely cheap rate, and it's snapped up by oligarchs. A handful of men fight over these cheap state-owned businesses. They kill each other over them until just a few men hold the important infrastructures inside Russia. Their gas companies, the electricity, all of these institutions that used to be run by the state. They very quickly become billionaires. They become Russia's oligarchs. And they're still causing us lots of trouble today. And these are some of the primary men who now do the bidding of Putin, do his will. He works through his oligarchs more so than he would work through his movement. And I was just thinking about something I'd read recently about how a big reason Putin never attacked the United States is because he had so much money in this country. There was no way on earth he was going to, destroy his own economy by destroying the economy of the United States. I don't know how many others of you have read that recently. But now it's open news. Back then, I had no understanding of any of that. Oops, we went back too much. Go back. We all know that if the American economy is not doing well, the whole world suffers. But now if the American economy is not doing well after 1991, that the King of the South will also suffer. So now there are two reasons for Putin to not engage the West in a hot war. And he needs to defeat his enemy without an open strike or damaging their economy. This requires a clever approach. And Putin is one of the smartest leaders alive, world leaders alive. He's been very clever through this history. In 1989, something new is developed, and this is known as the Internet's Big Bang, the World Wide Web. Prior to the World Wide Web's invention, the internet was not so useful. You could not put out or access information. It was not such a useful tool for either accessing or disseminating information. But in 1989, a man named Tim Berners-Lee fixes this problem. He writes a paper titled Information Management, a Proposal. It's all about how to put out and access information on the internet. And this is one of the things that Time magazine highlighted. They called it the internet's Big Bang. In 1990, he created the first web browser. So what went from being just a written paper was developed in 1990, and then first web browser was released in 1991. So these 3 years are not just our increase of knowledge and not just the fall of the Soviet Union, they have another layer or story. And what they are doing is developing the internet into being this information platform where you can put out vast quantities of information and also access it. And Tim Berners-Lee, who never directly profited off his invention, has also spent most of his life trying to guard it. While Silicon Valley started rideshare apps and social media networks without profoundly considering the consequences, Berners-Lee has spent the past 3 decades thinking about little else. From the beginning, in fact, Berners-Lee understood how the epic power of the web would radically transform governments, businesses, and societies. He also envisioned that his invention could, in the wrong hands, become a destroyer of worlds, as Robert Oppenheimer once infamously observed of his own creation. The elephants of his time. His prophecy came to life most recently when revelations emerged that Russian hackers interfered with the 2016 presidential election, or when Facebook admitted it exposed data on more than 80 million users to a political research firm, Cambridge Analytica, which worked for Donald Trump's campaign. This episode was the latest in an increasingly chilling narrative. In 2012, Facebook conducted secret psychological experiments on nearly 700,000 users. Both Google and Amazon have filed patent applications for devices designed to listen for mood shifts and emotions in the human voice. And I found this link here and I went looking for information on him, and there isn't a whole lot of information, surprisingly, that I was able to dig up. During the Cold War, we talked about sanctions and subterfuges, and now there is a new platform to engage in an actively activity particularly in undermining your enemy. It doesn't take Russia long. In 1996, Russia hacks the USA and goes into their Navy, into the computer system of their defense networks. So 1996, the formalization of our message, Russia is already beginning to act. They hacked the USA. It's known as Moonlight Maze, the name given to that operation. In early March of 1998, word came through that someone had hacked into the computers at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio and was pilfering files, unclassified but sensitive, on cockpit design and microchip schematics. Over the next few months, the hacker fanned out to other military facilities. No one knew his location. The hopping from one site to another was prodigious, swift, and global. His searches bore no clear pattern except that they involved high-profile military research and development projects. 9 months earlier, when cyber war was still a hypothetical matter, the Pentagon had staged a war game called Eligible Receiver, in which 25 members of an NSA red team, using commercially available gear, hacked into every Defense Department computer network, shutting down or distorting vital communications. Now, in an operation that an interagency task force dubbed Moonlight Maze, the Pentagon was experiencing the real thing from a foreign power. Oops. Wait. I lost my place. Oh boy. Okay. Yeah, there it is. In 1989, something new is developed, and this is known as the Internet's Big Bang. Oh, wait, did this. Okay. 1996, another big bang. You have the release of Google and various news sources. Yahoo, Fox News, newspapers begin to go online, such as the Washington Post. I want to mention one other, Krypton. We're not so familiar with Krypton. You might be familiar with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. This was the predecessor to WikiLeaks, the website that was set up to release information on the government. So you have all types of news being set up in 1996, and as a movement, we need to be much more aware of Fox News, what they were set up for in 1996. Because in Fox News, we have a new platform speaking for conservative Protestant America. And they lead and are crucial to the election of Donald Trump, and also crucial to what he is going to do in the future. Then we have Google, and now we have search engines. Then we have Krypton releasing government secrets. And we have Russia waking up to the fact that they can hack the USA and gain information. This is a quick overview of a study that was done last year. We can see it in more detail in the October 2018 SOPT when it was first presented. When we go back to this time period, it doesn't just give us the information for our internal message. It also gives us the external events. And what we see being developed is a new mode of warfare, a new weapon. Even secular sources recognize this event. And it was interesting this week, I think it was Australia decided that Julian Assange, they agreed that Julian Assange should be extradited back to the United States after formally agreeing that he shouldn't be because they thought he was too mentally ill and he might kill himself. So now all of a sudden it's okay for him to go back to the United States. Not sure why or what changed. That should be an interesting development. Donald Trump said something interesting around September last year. We're going to discuss why he said this. But he said the rise of the internet corresponded with the rise of the USA as the world's only superpower. What is Trump saying? He's comparing and contrasting, and he's saying that at the same time that the internet rose up is the same time that the USA was rising as the world's only superpower. And the key word is only. When the USA rising up is, when was the USA rising up as the world's only superpower? 1989 to 1991. Prior to 1989, how many world superpowers do you have? 2. So 1989 is the fall of the King of the South. And if the other superpower is falling, you can be sure the USA is rising up as the world's only superpower. And he says that this time period, he takes that concept and compares and contrasts, and he says that the same time this is happening is the rise of the internet. So Donald Trump recognizes that connection. And it's this thread, the information and increase of knowledge that we need to bring down into our history and use to understand how battles are fought in our time, because we are already being told that in the increase of knowledge. And understanding the concept of MAD, mutually assured destruction, we can understand why there cannot be a hot war. That would be suicide. So the point we need to see is when we are going through our studies, we need to recognize the role of the internet. We also need to see that we cannot disconnect our thread. We can't see an external battle in the future and disconnect that event from the history that leads to that event. So whatever was happening in this time period, it's the same issue in this time period, all along the road. So when we come to Raffia, it's already being explained to us in the history of 1989 to 1991. There was another reason to start considering this subject, because we began to consider it in 2018, when we understood that 2016 is the Battle of Ipsus. And what won the Battle of Ipsus for the Allies? Elephants. And then Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. So whatever mode of warfare that was used in 2016 is the mode of warfare that is going to be used at raffia. And then we also saw that not only can you place elephants here, it's the beginning of World War II. And the invasion of Poland looks a lot like the invasions of the Soviet Union. So now we have two witnesses to say that raffia looks like 2016 in the method of warfare. And since that time, we have also been able to see 2018 develop, which makes that argument stronger still. So we must connect our waymarks. Before we get into the subject of 2016, we need to consider one other topic, and that is 2014. We are saying 2014 is Sunday law for the priests, and there was a little bit of difficulty in the movement to identify what that looked like, what that Sunday law was in 2014. There are ideas that were thrown around. The way that we need to understand the Sunday law in 2014 is by going into our reform line from the perspective of a parable. And that is that 2014 is going to be understood by a compare and a contrast. The first point we're going to compare and contrast. The second point we're going to connect our waymarks and say that whatever happened in 2014 can be traced back and pinned to the time of the end. Two rules we need to follow. Before we go into a study of 2016 and the Battle of Ipsus, we'll take a moment and consider 2014. And what was 2014 in Pyrrhus and World War II? What happened here? We understood that there was an alliance between the King of the South and the King of the North. To explain this, we'll go back to the time of the end and discuss a business that was set up. In 1989, this isn't in England, it's in Britain. We're going to explain why it needed to be in Britain. There's a man named Nigel Oaks, and he sets up a business. It begins just as research. He plans on doing research on human behavior, and his plan is with this study of human behavior to learn how to manipulate and control it, and then make money off that research. And he's doing this study. As he's doing this study, he has a new tool he can use, and that is the internet. So the study of human behavior becomes much more detailed than it has ever been before. He sets up BDI, Behavior Dynamics Working Group. It's an institute run in Britain that studies social science. It describes itself as the world's leading center for research and development into persuasion and social influence. It's said to be the only academic organization in the world whose understanding of this psychology and persuasion has been successfully used globally. So what was first just a study that began in 1989, Behavior Dynamics Working Group, becomes this institute in 1990. In 1992, this man, Nigel Oaks, he's speaking to a magazine and describing this business he is setting up. He says, we use the same techniques as Aristotle and Hitler. This I found to be one of the most interesting parts of this presentation. We appeal to people on an emotional level to get them to agree on a functional level. It's interesting that he's saying the same techniques that Hitler used, because we traced our history, Raphia and Penium, but first of all, Ipsus, and lined it up with World War II. And who is Hitler? Donald Trump. The same technique that Hitler used to rise to power, the same techniques that Trump is going to use. And the man that created this technique, now using the internet freely, admitted that in 1992. And the research done in 1989 is what is developed through this history. And then used in Trump's campaign, same techniques used to elect Trump were used to elect Hitler. And the head of the company that founded Cambridge Analytica said last year that President Donald Trump uses the same propaganda methods as Adolf Hitler did 80 years ago. Nigel Oaks is the CEO of SCL Group, which is the parent company of Cambridge Analytica, the data mining company that used information it gleaned about Facebook users to try and help Trump during the 2016 elections. Last year, Oaks was interviewed by a University of Essex professor about propaganda and its role in swaying public opinion during the Brexit referendum. The transcripts of the interview were posted by a committee of the British Parliament. And they freely admit that to use these techniques, they need to use mass public persuasion and deception. As one of the leading members once said, nothing has to be true. You just need people to believe it. And that's the mentality that's being fed to Trump in 2016. It doesn't matter if Obama is born in Africa. What matters is that people believe it. Doesn't matter whether or not it's true that Hillary's a pedophile, as long as people believe it. And I am not really sure how anyone believes that Donald Trump says the truth. I'm not sure that even his supporters even believe what he says, but most of us are aware that he has this problem with truth. And these are the same techniques that Hitler used to deceive the public. To manipulate the public, it doesn't have to be true. What it has to do is create an emotional response. That emotional response is nearly always fear. And in the last 2 years since the COVID pandemic started, it's all been about fear. Everything they wanted Trump's followers to do, all they had to do was push that fear button and with propaganda. And the results just, streamed in. And even now that we're heading into another winter with COVID rising and sick people taking up hospital beds, it still doesn't matter. People are still preferring to believe a lie, including my own son. Every day he tries to get me to listen to some unaffiliated, independent speaker of some kind on the subject of vaccines, and he just doesn't get the fact that I prefer to listen to certain news streams.
What do you, I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
when your son sends you these things and tells you, what is your response?
He first asked me if I listened to the things, and I attempt to listen to them. And these are things that would easily appeal to a 30-year-old young man who kind of just wants nothing to do with established mainstream media. These are just independent people, editorializing and giving their opinions on things. But it's not something I agree with. Sometimes they use profanity and whatever, and I just don't want to keep listening to it. And I sent him opposing articles like the kind we read, and he's just like, well, texting you is the same as trying to talk to you. So he kind of just gives up. And he's so, I don't know how much he actually tries to grapple with what's really going on in the world, or if he even knows what's really going on in the world. All he does all day long is listen to these independent, little sparks of information he comes up with. And it takes time. And when we all know this, it takes time to comb through these articles and keep up with the information about what's really going on in the world. And it's difficult. It's not easy. It's my own husband, there's some things I can get him to look at, and then there's some things, well, what can we do about it? We can't do anything about this. So why are we, and, and my son is the kind, he wants to talk on and on and on about whatever it is he's believing in, but he really doesn't have a lot of interest in listening to the opposing side, because he figures he's already grappled with, all the pros and cons of something. And like this morning, he was going on about some other person he wanted me to check out. And I kind of just pointed to my upper arm and said, I got a booster. I'm trying to be a witness. That's the only way I can be a witness, is to actually live it.
But they have to see, especially if you go back to Brendan's presentation, what would the difference have made if Adam would have had compassion and empathy that and taken Eve, not to say that he didn't, in his arms and supporting her in, the wrong that she did, supporting her in love rather than going on to then eventually blame her for the outcome of things. And same thing when you go to Shem and Japheth. So, and I've been thinking about that since he went through all that, because I was thinking about during lunch when Christ, when they brought the woman, that the adulterous woman, right? And they bring her in and he says, where are your accusers, right? And he says, go and sin no more. He understood what brought the situation on. First of all, there was the men, right? And what in the position she was in, the finance or whatever brought her to do what she does, and whatever both sides have going on. He showed compassion, and compassion looking beyond. And that's one of the things that the history of me being with the guy that was emotionally abusive really helped me, because I had people coming at me, mainly one of my sisters coming at me saying, how can you, or she's telling me that I needed to like myself. And I say, I like myself just fine. Well, then why you let him treat you that way? And it was like this drill that went in my head. And so when I realized I went through such a radical change, and I realized that I went through that change, but I also see other people in the same situation. It's like, what can help people? You know what I mean? It doesn't do them any good to hammer them for what they're in. It just showing compassion. And so showing people compassion and empathy and love. I'm not saying necessarily for how to get around with your son, but what my point is really setting the example of Christ, because that's the mind we want. The mind that I don't know how to say this, but we want to be able to know and to do as he did, because he knew how to reach hearts, and we can't reach every heart. But so my point is to really understand and be like Christ. Let this mind be in you, so that we can be a living testimony, not just one that goes and tells them, hey, you're wrong about this, and watch this, but a real living testimony of the character of God, all the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I realize I'm probably a big part of the reason why he has his attitude about vaccines that he does, is because that was my attitude at one time. All the conservatism.
Point.
Yeah, all the conservatism that I was, living for years. And I would write up a note quoting Ellen White and hand it to the people at the school and say, I don't believe in vaccines, and they'd have to accept it because it was my religious viewpoint. Even though all Adventists didn't have that viewpoint, I don't think they took the time to investigate that. But the other day I texted him his vaccination record, because he did get some vaccines before my husband died. My husband was my first one was the one that wanted him to get vaccinated, both of them. I texted both of them these vaccination records I found while I was digging through all this stuff in my file cabinet this last week. And he says, oh, well, you'd have to, I said, see, you were vaccinated. He said, well, you'd have to, knock me out and drag me to the drugstore and, shoot me while I was still knocked out in order for me to get it. It's, it's like an ideology to him. And that's why they'll totally gloss over whatever scientific evidence there is out there. They just want to hold on to these beliefs. And, he seems to really, think that it's going to hurt him, because I guess that's what my view was for years, that they were dangerous, even though I had had all the vaccines when I was a kid. And yeah, it's just, once I got involved in Adventism way back, 88 it was, and then I had already had my first son, I just quickly sucked up and absorbed all the conservative ideas that, were ruminating amongst, the people I call friends, which tend to be conservative people. I just always was steering clear of the liberal people, because it just seemed like, they're just not Adventists. They're just not real Adventists, because they're not following Ellen White. And there were so many other things I wish both my kids had adopted, that I had stood up just as strongly for, like a vegan diet. That they wanted nothing to do with once they reached a certain age. And to this day, they don't want anything to do with it. It would have been so much better if they'd stood up strongly for that instead of any of the other things.
Did you ever have an opportunity to, these kind of things just have to flow, or pray for the opportunity to actually admit that you were misled and made mistakes?
The opportunity for that has not come up. It's just, it always gets into this, not always heated thing, but he will talk on and on and on about what this person and that person says. And then what he wants more than anything is for me to listen to these people. And I make efforts. And like I said, some of this stuff is just clearly aimed at someone his age, his personality type, what he believes. It's just clearly aimed in his direction. And my focus is on the science, on whatever evidence there is, which doesn't mean anything to him because he doesn't believe it. He knows the history with me, and the way they both responded when we took this liberal turn in the movement was like, wait a minute. Why are you going around getting a vaccine? And it wasn't just them, it was other people who knew me and had known me for years. They couldn't figure out why all of a sudden I was flip-flopping on so many things. And I would just say, well, I don't remember what I said actually, but whenever it did come up, I probably would just try to prove why I now understand that it's important. And, you have current events, you have things on the news that are, telling us how dangerous it is not to get vaccinated, not to get a booster, not to wear masks, and social distance. And I'm sure they hear all this stuff too, but people choose what they want to choose. And he's just really lucky that when he did catch COVID over the summer, he and his girlfriend, that neither of them got really sick. Ever since then, I've thought, God must have been protecting them, because she's a waitress and she was the one that caught it initially, and it could have been really bad. But all that happened was she lost her sense of taste and smell. And after that, she lost a bunch of weight, which turned out to be a good thing. But in him, all he did was get sick for a day. At us, my husband and I, we were displaced for a whole week. We had to go hide out at a hotel at least part of the time for like a week or two in the hottest part of the summer, and we couldn't run our air conditioning. But yeah, I don't know what it's going to take for him to come around. I think he just kind of wants somebody to say, oh yeah, you're right, you're right, you're right.
I asked that because on Thanksgiving, I kind of had the opportunity to talk with somebody that I've known for probably more than 10 years. easily. And kind of on the capitalist side, younger person on the capitalist side, not Christian though. But over the years, I have tried to share with him, things about the Bible. He's always respected that I, have religion and all of that. But there are a couple of times where he can get real bullyish when he disagrees with not just with me, but with people in general. So I had the opportunity to sit and talk for quite a bit about, some of the changes that we've come to understand. And I can't even remember the entire conversation, but not looking at the religious side or the internal side of it so much as is going through several steps of the external to really kind of lay out equality. And his response was kind of, at one point anyways, he got kind of tired because it was late, and his response was appreciative. He actually, I don't remember exactly what he said, but appreciative that I was able to, I don't know how he said it, but that to change course when you see that you're wrong about something. You know what I'm saying? So you never know what might just play a role in, and I said, well, I never started this journey to go the wrong direction. And so if I have to be corrected, then I have to be corrected, because I didn't start here to end in the same place. And so it was just interesting, because different things are going to reach different people. And that's when, if you remember, one of the questions in a Q&A was asked, is there like a blueprint to how to go out and tell people? It's really tough, because it's where you're at with that person, and what your interaction and what about that person, and kind of go in a direction where you how can you meet them? How can a blueprint meet them where they're at? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, if I were to tell them the blatant truth, well, I'm in this movement, and this movement, they're Adventists, and they all were very conservative, and they all were very anti-vax at one time. And then we learned the truth because of parable teaching. That's just the plain truth of the matter. That's the whole ball of wax right there. It was parable teaching and a totally different methodology, but I can't, he thinks I'm in a cult or something now. And I think maybe they've always thought I was, since I got, into the movement, and even before that.
I have a comment, Linda.
Yeah.
It's I'm just amazed that that people take this this point of view that your son's taking, because I have family that have taken the same point of view. And in this where is it here? It says, and it says where Trump uses the same techniques that Hitler used to deceive the public. And that's everybody knows what happened there, and what the outcome was of that kind of behavior and that kind of thought process and all that. And yet people, they just forget, I don't know if they just want to overlook it or don't want to see it. And I think it's just, they just don't want to see it. That their politician is using the same techniques that Hitler did, and
he's not even into Trump. He doesn't like Trump. My youngest son is not political. I wasn't either. I mean, even in the last election, I wrote in Bernie Sanders' name. I didn't vote for either of the other two sides, because one's a compromiser and the other, was obvious. And I've never voted for the popular candidate. 1992, the other time I voted was Ross Perot. It was the guy supposedly sticking up for the, the little guys.
Yeah, I remember.
And now Bernie Sanders, he's going with the Starbucks employees and he's trying to get them to unionize and stuff. And I got into a conversation with my friend from college yesterday, and she was a Bernie fan back in 2016. She understands all the the allure of Bernie, and but like everybody else, she voted for Biden because he would beat Trump. And I said, the same thing happened with Abraham Lincoln. They voted for him too for the same reason, even though he wasn't really the right candidate, and he didn't want to let the slaves go free for a long time. Biden has a history of compromising when it comes to like minority rights and stuff. And we all know that history, that goes back to the Clinton administration. And before that, with so many Black men locked up for so many years who had been tortured into confessions, and they were busted for petty little drug offenses. And yet, you got all these kids growing up without fathers and so on. There's so much blood on these people's hands. I mean, I couldn't bring myself to vote for them. And I don't know everything about Bernie, but I kind of at least understood where he stood on things. And so Chris he doesn't vote. He's never voted. I mean, his older brother down in Arizona, he would speak positively of Trump, and he may have voted for Trump or not. I don't know. But since he moved down to Arizona, and he maybe even before that, he was already going down that road of being kind of racist and being kind of conservative and anti-vax. But when his girlfriend at the time got pregnant 11, 12 months ago or whatever, somewhere between then and now, she convinced him that they needed to get vaccinated because, what if, she caught COVID while she was pregnant, and then something happened to baby and stuff. So she got, I guess, from what she told me, she got after him about getting vaccinated. And that was the way they were able to fly out here. And it was October or November to come visit me because I was in no shape to go anywhere. But he was still putting his foot down about it. Even after that, like he still didn't believe in doing the vaccine. I made such an indelible impression upon them about vaccines over the years. I just wish, they had, taken up the other habits I had, like the vegan diet, and maybe stayed with some sort of religion. But they both gave up that too. And so, yeah, they held on to very, very little of anything.
Just don't give up on them.
Yeah, don't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just, they're 30 and 33 years old. They're going to do what they want to do. I don't, he's the one that tries so hard to convince me. I don't beat anybody over the head about anything. I just kind of do my thing. And it seems to bother him to no end that I'm okay with these vaccines. And it's for him, it's all a matter of, they can't make me do something I don't want to do.
Oh yeah, they can. It wouldn't be.
Well, like you two are the only ones that got COVID in the whole family. You're the only ones that are not vaccinated. And that doesn't seem to bother him that much either. It's all about, he wants to be this independent thing and believe what he wants to believe. And I guess God smiled on them last summer in their ignorance. They didn't get really sick. And so, yeah. And yeah, husband and I, we have not gotten COVID. We've gotten all the vaccines. He's much more in the public, with the public exposure, since I haven't been working since July. I'm just quarantined since then. It's the way I think about it. I'm just alone all day long, every day. Just me, my back. And it's, yeah, and now it's heading into winter, and it's I've got lots of physical therapy to do. Otherwise, I'd probably be going crazy. But yeah. So I just hope, and he's not a real sociable person, and maybe that helps protect him from getting it. She, on the end, his girlfriend, on the other hand, is very sociable.
I'll tell you what, my dad's been telling me about Advanticism for 50 years, and I didn't want to hear none of it. When he talked religion, I wanted to run the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And when I became an Adventist, no one was more shocked than my dad, because I was the last kid that he thought would ever become anything close to Adventist,
Yeah.
And he'd been telling me stuff for like I said, 50 years, and it was until my wife told me she wanted to get closer to God and go to church and all that. And I seen how important it was for her, so I said, "Let's go." If it's something you want to do, then we want to do it together, because it could be a thing that pushes people apart.
Mm.
And I didn't want that. And then when I was confronted with the truth and God's message, there was just no way I could turn my back on it. There was no choice in the matter. I'd be turning my back on the truth,
Yeah, and my husband's nothing him, but he has seen my whole, going from Jeff Pippinger, listening to Jeff Pippinger, to Parminder, Elder Parminder and Elder Tess, and the whole metamorphosis. He couldn't convince me about a lot of things, including eating mushrooms. My whole life, I never ate mushrooms. I would not go near them. And he liked them, but, because I didn't like them, we just kind of never ate them. And then one day came when Elder Parminder was pushing the fact that, mushrooms, there's nothing bad about them, and they won't hurt you. They're good for you. And I like, okay. And I found out how good they were for you. I think that's played a big part in keeping me healthy too. There's shiitake and maitake mushrooms with vitamin D in them and everything, and those things that help your immune system. But I mean, there were certain things nobody can convince me about. I was one of those anti-Trinitarian people who, for years, if not 20 years, I confronted Jeff Pippinger about it from the very first time I met him. And it was a letter he wrote me, correspondence and email, that clicked. It got me out of that whole thing. Not that I'm a Trinitarian now, but getting me to understand the real truth about it and the way we're supposed to correctly think about the Godhead. I ended up sharing this correspondence with Elder Tabo down in Arkansas, 2019. Because he knew people that were caught up in that whole thing, and he can go from one spectrum to another, from one error to another, and somehow completely gloss over the real truth of what the Godhead is, and stay in that for years. He got me out of that. Elder Parminder got me eating mushrooms. Elder Tess and Parminder got us getting vaccines and being what do you call it? The word sympathetic about LGBTQ and minorities and women's rights and everything. And how do you explain it? How do you explain any of that any other way to people?
Exactly.
Because it's the truth. That's how it happened. We were convinced by a methodology, but he has no interest in religion. If I try to sit down and explain it in all that way, he's not going to listen. And so I just have to point people to the science and point people to the very same articles and information that have caused us to change our minds. Because even though Elder Parminder and Tess told us these things, they had to show us the actual evidence. media broadcast. They had to put it in front of our faces and say, this is what's happening. And, this is the history, and this is, these are the lines, and this is what the lines are teaching.
I
And it's
got a
not,
feeling-
yeah.
I got a
What?
feeling that your son's point of view will change in about 10 years.
Well, hopefully for both of them, they're gonna keep
Yeah.
evolving somehow.
I have lots of nephews and nieces. I had truckloads of nephews and nieces.
Hmm.
And my famous statement to them was when they would tell me something, I said, well, you know what? We're going to have this conversation in 10 years, and then we'll see where you're at.
I'm not sure we got 10 years left.
I'm not either, and that would be fine with me.
Look at how these things are happening in the Supreme Court.
Because if I last another 20 years, I'm probably going to need another back surgery and a knee surgery and this and that and the other thing I'd rather not go through. But I mean, I've always been very easygoing about the idea that the world was going to end sometime soon, and I bought into that from the very beginning. And so if it does, it does. It's not going to disappoint me. It only gets harder the older you get. I mean, every day is aches and pains and stiff joints and so on and so forth. And it's like I can't move as fast as I used to. And it's right now it's hard for me to believe that I'm going to ever be hunky-dory again. And people will tell me that. They'll say, it gets better. Believe it or not, it will get better. Like, well, I've been in the same pain for 2 months. I have a hard time believing that, but
It's always dark before the dawn.
it seems like no matter how much you do, how much you try to get better, it just still hurts.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what it's going to take with either of them. I know Corey is not raising his daughter religious, and neither is her mother, which kind of tells me that one day she's probably going to have a hunger of her own for it. Like what happened to me. Nobody taught me anything formally about religion, and I was into New Age. My sister and I just jumped into New Age. She was raised Lutheran, but then we all jumped into New Age, and then became Adventists and vegetarians, and that seemed to be, because I don't know, for me it was always about what's going to happen in the future. I want to know what's going to happen in the future. That's always what intrigued me. Astrology was one way of doing it, but when I got a hold of Great Controversy, it was a whole new ball game. Or actually, Bible initially. The Bible is what leads you to get that curiosity about prophecy. And then God will either make you wait another 8 or 10 years, or he'll get you there quicker. And it's just hook you up with the right people, and you have to be in the right place at the right time.
Your heart's got to be right. Your heart has to be open to receive the word of God, just like yours was.
I think it was some of the time I was 16, it was always open. I mean, I would watch occult movies because I was into the New Age thing, and I was into occult stuff, and because it was always about, oh, what happens after you die? I used to think you see the bright light. We wrote a term paper on it in high school, and read a book and wrote a term paper on it. And it was just something that, because my parents never answered that question. I never had formal religious training. And so I didn't have any preconceived ideas other than what most people tend to believe, that maybe you go to heaven. But I didn't know if I believed in God. Like, do I? Is God real? I don't know. There's ghosts. I thought ghosts were real. And yeah, I watch occult movies. I'd look up stuff in the Bible and Revelation. I'm like, what does this mean? And then it would take another 8 years before we got hooked up with some Adventists and get some literature and started, really understanding it all. And that it's never been easy for me to understand why other people aren't interested in it. I've met very few people who it just clicks with, and it just, most people just want to hang on to this idea of you die and you go to heaven. And that's it. And my own husband, who was raised in the, what do you call it? Missouri Synod Lutheran Church in Iowa for years. Had no conception, has had no conception of the timing and the sequence of the time at the end, what happens and who goes to heaven first and all that, because that church, has nothing to do with any of that. But when you don't come out of a church, anything is game, even the occult. And people who get involved in the occult, some who've gone into the highest levels. There's this one guy, Adventists have a book about him. I don't remember his name, but he'll tell you that the reason he wanted to be a 90th degree, was it Freemason or something or other, Scottish Rite, is because he was seeking God. So whatever you think is going to get you to God, that's what you latch on to, I guess. If that's what, So for me, it was Adventism at that point.
It's amazing to see the prophecy unfold before our eyes.
Yeah.
Elder Tess and Elder Parmenter have laid out the lines and put it in before our eyes, and it's unfolded before our eyes. To me, I find that so amazing that I have no words for it. It's just amazing. It's just, and daily it just unfolds. It just folds more and more and more come out, just like it's coming off the line. Exactly.
Yeah, and I find it really hard to believe why other people can't see it, or they don't have this
Right,
appreciation for it. And today I just found out for sure. Yeah, it was in the Sabbath school in the morning, I think. Or no, was it? Oh, no, I can't remember. It was either Elaine's Sabbath school or it was the Lambert Church Sabbath school. No, I can't remember. But anyway, found out people I knew, after I joined the movement, left the movement. I didn't really know what happened to them. And, they had moved down to Arkansas, and I had noticed them in the meetings for a long time, and I didn't know what happened to them. And yeah, and I'm like, well, why all of a sudden did they think that, I don't know, maybe they're still holding on to, Jeff Pippinger's teachings and the way he was teaching things. I don't know. Maybe they completely left the movement. Maybe they're still holding on to that. But I don't know why, you could deny all that and walk away from it and all of a sudden say, well, no, I was just kind of like out of my mind when I was believing in that.
Well,
what are you going to go to? You leave this, what are you going to go to?
Exactly.
It's so, yeah, I have so many question marks in my head about some people that I knew years ago and what happened and everything. But yeah, I don't worry about my kids. I've got so much else going on, and I just try to send them information here and there when I think it's important to do so, and try to, get them straightened out somehow. But people are gonna do what they want to do, and they do it when they want to do it. And if they're typical men and they're typical, don't listen to what women say, what can you do? I've been trying to work with my own husband about all that stuff. And he has seen the transformation with me. He really didn't like Jeff Pippinger all along the way. But he has seen the transformation with me from liking mushrooms to, embracing equality and equal rights for people, which, why would anybody think that's a bad thing?
Right.
And he thinks a lot of that's positive, but I think he struggles with maybe fear. Some people don't look at the second coming in the same way as we do. They look at it more like fear, like the Protestant churches basically did in 1844. And when you come out of those churches, you kind of still have that, mentality. Somehow you're afraid of it. And you can waste your time being afraid of it, but you still got to be ready for it one way or another. And some of us maybe we'll find out we're not ready. I don't know. I don't know about me. I mean, I can't say for sure, oh, I'm going to definitely make it. I mean, how does anybody know what's going to happen in the future? All you can do is keep plugging away, keeping up with the message and keeping up with the light, and let God do the rest.
Well, we'll pray that your kids will come to the conclusion that, wow, mom was right. All that stuff she said was,
Yeah.
true,
Yeah, it's, yeah. You
All
gotta
you
be
can
able to,
do. That's all you can do is pray.
Yep. So, whoops, this is not working. Or did it work? Let me see. Sometimes I get, okay, yeah, that was right. Okay. Let's see. Be afraid of Muslims. Be afraid of immigrants. Be afraid of anyone who does not fit into your definition of the Judeo-Christian West. This phrase applies specifically to Judeo-Christian West because in this history, another person becomes involved. Steve Bannon. We need to look into this man and understand him. Search out his mentality and what he says and what he has been involved in. This work began in 1989 with the Behavioral Dynamics Working Group and is then developed by Nigel Oaks. They connect with Steve Bannon, and he is responsible for 2 recent events that have changed the world as we know it. Both of the events are the work of this company: the election of Donald Trump and Brexit in the UK, the division of the European Union. And Steve Bannon said these are the 2 areas he is fighting, what he's fought for: breaking up the European Union, beginning in London, and Donald Trump's election. We are discussing 2014. We want to understand what's happening in 2014, and we understand whatever it is, it's a violation of the Constitution and people's rights under the Constitution. And if we take 2014 and we understand that it is the pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in World War II, and it's the alliance between Pyrrhus and Demetrius in the history of Pyrrhus, what are we saying about 2014? Who is the king of the North? In this history, in World War II, who is the king of the North? Germany. And the king is Hitler. So they are identifying Hitler, the king of the North, in the history of Donald Trump, even before he is elected. No one knows that in 2014, Donald Trump is going to run for president, although you can begin to be aware of that from 2011. What we have done is connect our waymarks. We have gone from 1989 and we're starting to look at how we are going to apply this history, what World War III will look like in our history. And when we've completed our study of 2014, and we will consider those 2 battles, 2016 and 2018. So we've connected our waymarks, and now we will look at a compare and a contrast. What are we going to compare and contrast? What we are going to compare and contrast is the internal with the external, our 2 threads. 1, 2. Internal and external. What's happening inside the movement and what's happening outside the movement? So inside the movement in 2012 is a waymark, and why? The message of time setting was first developed in 2012 and was presented to the movement here. Where was that message developed? In Britain, the UK. So a message of time comes out of the UK and enters the US in 2012. You have Steve Bannon doing something in 2012, and then you have Elder Parminder in the UK doing something. We discussed the Behavioral Dynamics Working Group. In 1993, they formed a new company, SCL. This was the furthest development as a company, and it stands for Strategic Communication Laboratory. So it's a laboratory, like a science laboratory, where you study human behavior and how to manipulate it. And the laboratory is the internet. Taking people's behavior from the internet primarily, personal data, and using that to create a profile of who that person is on a deeper level than whatever has been able to be done before. Because beginning in 1989, people began to put out personal info on the internet, and that has just developed. Now there's thousands of pieces of personal data on the internet. They can be small pieces of data or information that they create a picture or a profile of what that person is like, of their fears and their hope. And if Hitler would have had this tool, he would have been even more effective, because it gives you much more that you are now able to manipulate, and he could now do it at a scientific level. So in 1993, it forms the Strategic Communications Laboratory. They harness their skills in war zones, practice their skills. They develop their techniques in war zones like Iraq and Afghanistan through this history. Then they begin to realize that the same techniques they're using in war zones to persuade people to not join militant groups, they can use in elections to persuade people to vote or feel a certain way. And they become involved in elections, primarily in third world countries. The reason that they're not so involved in the West is because that their greatest threat to what they do is transparency. They cannot work somewhere to their full effect if there is a free and open media. It makes it much harder to manipulate people if there's a free media. And that's one of the reasons it takes them so long to enter the US market, which tells us we no longer have a free media, I guess. So in 2012, something happens in the USA. What happened? This is the election of Obama. Obama served one term. He comes to 2012. He's fighting Mitt Romney, and Obama wins. He's a Democrat and defeats the Republican Mitt Romney. The Republican Party has now lost 2 elections, and they're extremely unhappy with the changes that Obama is making to the country. Obama is bringing in such changes. In 2011, he brings in gay marriage, and the Republican Party's base is particularly conservative Protestant America. So they're very unhappy with the changes Obama is making, and because some of them are quite significant. And in 2012, he's reelected. The Republican Party is shaken and extremely unhappy. They want to find a tool that will ensure that they do not lose the following election in 2016. And SCL themselves said that this was the catalyst to enter into the American market. Now there's a political party that's willing to employ them. So in 2012, SCL enters the US market. They're coming from the UK into the US. And all of this is to do a work building up to 2016. Who they connect with in this history is Steve Bannon and some major Republican donors. Alexander Nix was the public face of SCL, the CEO of the company. He said that in 2012, there was a vacuum with the Republican Party that created a commercial opportunity for SCL to begin to work with that political party. In 2013, he meets 2 people, Christopher Wiley, and it's through his testimony that this history was uncovered. He is a young man, but incredibly brilliant, gifted with code and computers. He did much of the work for them in this history. And these men, Christopher Wiley, Alexander Nix, CEO, and Steve Bannon, they see there's opportunity. Whistleblower describes how firm link to former Trump advisor Steve Bannon compiled user data to target American voters. In a presentation at the 2016 Concordia Annual Summit in New York, Mr. Alexander Nix discusses the power of big data in global elections. Cambridge Analytica's revolutionary approach to audience targeting, data modeling, and psychographic profiling has made them a leader in behavioral micro-targeting for election processes around the world. Steve Bannon says that the US is in a transition phase. It's changing. He says that this is the 4th time this has happened in history. The first time was the American Revolution. The second time was the Civil War. The third time, World War II. Fourth time is our history, the present. The American Revolution, the Civil War, World War II, and the Great Depression, and the present day. Steve Bannon is a far-right leaning conservative Protestant American. He sees Obama as dangerous and that America is losing control of its heritage, which he says is Christian. What he sees in this company is something or a tool or a weapon he can use to try and manipulate the next election. We'll finish this story in our next study.
A prototype.
Hmm?
A prototype.
Yep. Last week, we began to understand we're facing battles, 4 in our history, and they begin in 2016. What we want to understand is what that looks like. So we are using 2 rules, compare and contrast, to connect our waymarks. We already do that with the internal message. Everything is built on what has gone before. And in a special way, it's built on an increase of knowledge, just like it was in the Millerite history. So we need to go back to the time of the end to see what this war is going to look like, and then follow it at each stage of development. We've done that on 2 levels and saw the rise of the internet and connected with that the rise of this particular company that is designed to use the same techniques as Hitler to use the information to manipulate the public opinion. And all of this you can pin in 1989, develop into the battles we see in our history. That's the end of that.
We see Steve Bannon involved. Really, I'm sure he never left the scene, but we see him more again now. And he's the one that what he wants to be the martyr for when it comes to the insurrection.
Not sure. I don't understand a whole lot about him. Let's see here. Okay, I was going to, okay, share screen again. Let's see. Here's number 8. And I'll hide this. Oops. Okay. Oh, yeah, forgot. Okay. From beginning. There we go. All right. In our previous studies, we looked at 2 major subjects. We spent time on Acts 27. We looked at those 2 ships, the journey of Paul, as I repeat and enlarge. Those 2 ships are telling the same story of those institutions from 2 different perspectives. So we see this connection between the USA and Adventism, beginning from the time of the end in 1798. In comparing and contrasting those institutions, we can learn a lot, particularly regarding the USA, because we have spent so much time studying Adventism. We know 1798, William Miller, Millerite history. We trace that to 1844. We talk about the 2520, 1863, the rejection of our prophetic message, and then in our movement particularly, we're interested in that thread of history from 1798 to the Sunday Law. But if we consider the external history of the USA, we find that it's inseparable. At each waymark, we're also going to experience external, particularly in 1863 when it relates to the USA. That's one lesson we learned from Acts 27. The USA and Adventism is on the same journey, symbolized by the same ship. Then we also considered the number 273, and it brought us into the history of Pyrrhus in 2 parts, an alpha and an omega history. So we find that the king of the south exists in 2 histories, first in Macedonia and then in Italy. So we're able to identify just with the king of the south in the history of Pyrrhus an alpha and an omega. And we saw that we could bring this into our history, and that after 1798, there's going to be an alpha and an omega. One of these we find in the history of World War II and can actually trace it all the way back from 1917 to 1989. But the particular story that we highlighted was this World War II fight between Hitler and Stalin, between fascism and communism. And then we saw that World War II tells us about World War III, Hitler, Stalin, and Trump, Putin. After we laid out our histories, we cut our lines, and we did the exact same things that we would do with modern and ancient Israel. And we are not only going to do this, then from our omegas, we want to go back to our alpha and also draw lessons from these histories. So we need to take World War II and Pyrrhus history and overlay them with our own. So this becomes us in the history of Russia and the USA from 1989 to the Sunday Law. This becomes the history of Pyrrhus in Macedonia, Pyrrhus in Italy, and World War II. So Macedonia, Pyrrhus, Moses. Italy, Pyrrhus, Christ. Stalin, World War II, Millerites. Putin, World War III, us. Now we have these histories, Alpha and Omega, on the lines. This forms the first history and the second. In Elder Parminder's classes, he looked at the concept of Israel because you could talk about Moses, Christ, Millerites, and us. And we find failure and success. We observed from our chart that there are differences in World War II history with the King of the South. It shows us there are differences in the history of Israel. The history of the Millerites is going to have differences, not just in 1844, but we also need to observe a couple of others. We're going to expand on that concept in a later study. So we identified failure, success, failure, success. But out of all of this, we combined these lines and we saw that we have 4 sequential battles. The first battle lines up with 2016, second with 2018, the third with 2019, and what we first understood by calling it Raphia, and the final battle, which we understand as Panium. So we have 4 sequential battles. The first is Ipsus, second is Heraclea, then we would talk about Asculum and Beneventum. Then we could consider World War II, Poland, August 1940. Then we have the invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, and then we have the end of the war. So we then have 3 different histories to teach us about these battles, and what we want to do is go into the history of 2016 and understand what that battle looked like, because 2016 is the key that explains these other 3. Because in the Battle of Ipsus, what mode of warfare was used that decided the victor? Elephants. Heraclea, elephants. Asculum, elephants. Beneventum, elephants. So the same mode of warfare used in 2016 decided the winner in 2018. It's also going to be the same mode of warfare used at Raphia and Panium. If we're going to understand Raphia and Panium, we need to understand Ipsus and Heraclea. We'll look at both these battles in our next study. We reminded ourselves of this pattern, but we also want to consider methodology we are going to use. So if we were to consider the time of the end, and we were to talk about the internal, we've taught in this movement that our increase of knowledge is from 1989 to 1991. We're having an increase of knowledge, and then we can see it formalized in 1996, tested at 9/11, and we trace these external histories connected with internal events. And there are a couple of principles we need to remember. When we taught that everything that comes after the message that we are teaching now is found in the increase of knowledge, it is an accurate representation that everything that comes after is encapsulated in the increase of knowledge. And we see that in Millerite history, where William Miller is studying and comes to 1818, that he says he believes that in about 25 years, Christ will come back. There needs to be other information to expand on those subjects, but you can pin it all back into this time period where it is encapsulated form at the increase of knowledge. And we teach that in our message, that this increase of knowledge of Daniel 11:40, we find all that comes after, we can trace and pin back in the increase of knowledge. If we apply that to their internal, we should apply that to the external. And if we're going to take this history of warfare and battles of the King of the South, we should take it back and pin it to the external fence of 1989 to 1991. And you can see a few elements of this history. We discussed one of them in our previous study. Where is the USA on November 9th, 1989? When the Berlin Wall's falling, where is the USA in that work? They are not there. You can't see them. Because everything that built up to November 9th was in the 46-year history of the Cold War. If you didn't keep up with those external events and you come to 1989, you'd have a hard time blaming the USA. It becomes harder in our time than it was in theirs, because what's done more openly in the Cold War history is even more secretive in our own. But it's still required that you keep up with external events. Who overthrows Gorbachev in 1991? Who initiates that? It's not the USA, it's his own people. This is the history of an internal revolution, and the USSR, or King of the South, was destroyed from the inside, undercover. First lesson we can learn. Yeah, I was an Adventist. I was a one-year-old Adventist when this happened. Had no idea what was going on. I didn't follow the news. I was just watching it on TV, didn't know what it all meant till like 2-3 years later, when I found out some things at a Revelation seminar. But anyway, we also discussed the subject of internal and external waymarks. In Millerite history, for the most part, not in every case, we see they had the subject of Islam in 1840. That proved their day for a year principle. And when we trace these waymarks from April to October, particularly from 2001 to 2019, here, their reform line is not built like ours. It's internal events. And what they were required to do from 1798 is follow the development of this internal message from William Miller and the other pioneers who developed that. So you come to April 19th, there's an internal event, impacts the message, a disappointment. July 21, 1844, Samuel Snow brings a message. It continues to grow and expand, and what the Millerites are doing at every mark are following the development of this internal message. Our reform line is built a little differently, and that is how we connect our external events. Now, we're not just tracing the development of an internal message, we're tracing the development of external events. And that is one work that as a movement we have been doing behind in doing, whether we didn't see the need or we were looking in the wrong places. But if we don't trace the development from 1989 to 1990, and we come down to 2016 Ipsos, we are looking for a hot war at Raffia. We have cut our thread. We are saying there's about to be a battle and we're ignoring its development. By the time we get to 2019, Putin has been president for 20 years and he hasn't been sitting on his hands for that period. Then we find that we can take these external events back to the time of the end and pin them in here, 1991. This is what gives us the information about what this war looks like, the beginning of its development. We paraphrased a quote of Donald Trump's that he said in September last year. And what he said was that the rise of the internet occurred at the same time as the rise of the USA as the world's only superpower. That is a profound observation coming from Donald Trump, because what he is saying is that the USA rose as the world's only superpower at the same time as the internet was rising up. When was that? 1989. The USA begins to rise as the world's only superpower. Because prior to 1989, how many superpowers were there? 2, Soviet Union and the USA. In 1989, the USA begins to rise as the world's only superpower because the second is losing strength, it's falling. And he compares and contrasts that event with the rise of the internet, the beginning of the time of the end. Time of the end, 1989. Tim Berners-Lee writes a paper called Information Management, a Proposal. Nothing is developed, but it's a plan. There's something he can do to the internet to turn it into what they call an information creation machine, where you can put out information and access information. So at this stage, it's just a proposal. In 1990, it begins to take form. He creates the first web browser. In 1991, it's released to companies and then to the public in the same year. You have the release of the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Timothy John Berners-Lee, born June 8th, 1955, also known as Tim BL, is an English engineer and computer scientist, best known as the inventor of the World Wide Web. He's a professorial fellow of computer science at the University of Oxford and a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Berners-Lee proposed an information management system on 12 March 1989, then implemented the first successful communication between a hypertext transfer protocol, HTTP, client and server via the internet in mid-November of the same year. And we saw in 1996, by the time of the formalization of our message, at the same time Russia has realized it can use this engine to attack the USA. What they want is information. And this was Moonlight Maze. They gained access to the Navy, the Department of Defense, and stole a great deal of information for the Russian military. So you have the first Russian hacking in 1996. The same year, you have the release of Google, the creation and release of Yahoo, beginning of Fox News. And this is one we need to discuss more and more. Then we discuss Krypton, which was the predecessor of WikiLeaks. In 1996, Julian Assange is already engaged in hacking activity, and he sees this website and learns from them. He tries to work with them, but what he ends up doing is taking their concept and creating his own. This was called WikiLeaks, which we are probably more familiar with, but Krypton was his inspiration. Not only do you have Google, not only do you have Fox News and hacking, now you also have the release of government secrets, all elements we find in our time. Yes, and now Julian is back in the news again. This is just the first 6 to 7 years, but what we began to do is trace our thread of what these first years teach us about what war looks like in our time. It's the tool Vladimir Putin now has. We talked about MAD. This was the concept during the Cold War. Just a brief acronym to describe what this war period looks like differently than how war is traditionally fought. And the reason it looks different is because to openly attack each other would be an act of suicide, what they call mutually assured destruction. So if you had a weapon and I had a weapon, and if I fired mine, knowing that it would cause you to fire yours, it's more like a suicide pact. No one's going to fire. So they both have these nuclear weapons and neither party will use them. So they have to use unconventional methods to take down their enemy. Then we discuss the effect of the fall of the Soviet Union, because what isn't restraining the King of the South in this history is MAD. Weapons. But after 1991, their economy is privatized. All their major industries are sold off by the government, leaving just a handful of men who sometimes through murder and bribery destroy their rivals, very cheaply buy out those previously state-owned institutions. They buy them so cheaply that they very quickly become billionaires, and this is the creation of the Russian oligarch, one of Vladimir Putin's primary tools, or people who works through even more so than his government, because these ones are harder to tie to him. So now, after 1991, the King of the South has a new problem. If he destroys America, he will destroy their economy. If he damages the USA economy, he will also suffer. So he has to fight a war with the USA that does not look like a conventional war, because he needs as little retaliation as possible. And in that war, he needs to preserve the American economy. What he is doing, he has learned from American tactics and employs them against the USA. Those tactics are to weaken from the inside and to cause division. There was a top Russian general who said just recently that there is no line now between war and peace. War in our day looks a lot like peacetime, and peace in our day looks a lot like war. And what he's saying, one of the heads of the Russian military, is it's very hard for us to now say whether or not we're at war or at peace because they look the same. The line is gone between them, which is why we can walk through 2016 and not see the beginning of World War II. That line has been broken down because there is a new way of fighting. And it becomes more and more difficult to understand what is happening unless we look at it through the eyes of prophecy. Prophecy and parables become the same thing. We have to look at the world wars as a parable. They are the lines combined with other histories that are going to give us clarity of what history we are walking through. There are people in the American government who are saying that our current history is a repeat of Nazi Germany, that with the election of Donald Trump, they said was 1933 Germany. If you were to take them to these lines, they would see it. But there are people in this world are already watching this progress just by following the external events. The situation becomes where if you don't want to see it, you won't see it, which is why many people inside the USA, not just there, but worldwide, are becoming more and more divided. Because some people see their savior in Donald Trump, their Cyrus of Isaiah 46. Many of them are saying that. You have another side saying he's the last president of the US. This is 1933 Germany and the rise of Hitler. The people are choosing one side or the other, external to prophecy, based on how they navigate this history. We're given parables so that we can have a sure foundation, and they leave us with no doubt about what is happening. So the two principles that we particularly discussed, the two methods we want to use to unlock this history, the first was connecting our waymarks, identifying that we must treat events as a thread, just like we do with the internal message. And it is not enough to see a date in isolation. It has to be connected to a story. So people introduce the concepts now. They'll say they saw a new weapon in this history, 2019. They'll say America has developed a new weapon and they named it an elephant. Then they say this is proof that Pyrrhus is true because America has a new weapon called the elephant and are looking for elephants. And what is the problem with doing that? Take that weapon back to 1989 to 91 and 96, trace it through this history and connect to a story and explain how that weapon began in this history, 2019 in isolation. When we do that, we become newspaper prophets, and it's not a safe way of studying prophecy. There are many things in our time called the elephant. Just the fact that they take that name does not mean that they have the mode of warfare developed for Raphia. To study prophecy in that way is dangerous because it leads us to make conclusions that break our rules, disconnect our waymarks, and cause us to rely on newspapers for random stories. And the first rule is to connect our waymarks. And we should know our external history. Syria at the moment is a proxy war. Why does the USA want control of Syria? We should know that. I've included a quick review in this study, but we should be following these external events and trying to understand them. The other subject or tool we need to think about is compare and contrast. We said yesterday, two battles we particularly want to understand is in his Ipsus and Heraclea. We want to understand 2016 and 2018, but these battles can be understood unless we trace a little history. Cannot be understood unless we trace a little history. And we don't have time to go into such detail. But it has been done before in Brazil, and we will continue to expand on this subject. But we first need to trace our past history, which we briefly did this morning. And I also think we need to understand 2014. And to understand 2014, we need to see it as a compare and contrast. What we're going to compare and contrast is the internal and the external. So we have proxy war, Christ versus Satan, different the ideology. God prepares Abel, forms a church. Satan prepares Cain, formed a church. Great controversy. And the formed church here equals Babylon. Proxy war is a war instigated by a major power which does not itself become involved. The end of the Cold War brought an end to many of the proxy wars through which the two sides struggled to exert their influence. In 6,000 years of fighting it out, Christ makes sure his people are fit to fight. We are liable to go into Laodicea and not fight this battle. Ezekiel 3:14. It wakes us up, gives us our weapon or sword to fight for him. Christ has to struggle with his people. Satan has problems come from his own people as well. Can the papacy go into Laodicea? Can bad people refuse to obey Satan? Catholic Church did. And then there's Afghanistan, the USA versus Soviet Union. They're the rebels and the government of Afghanistan. 40 years later, Afghanistan's still getting destroyed, except US is supporting Afghanistan government, Russia supporting the rebels. It isn't over because political players propping up their side, sending more arms and money. Hundreds of thousands have died. Russia has pipelines into Europe, others do not, and ships are used and needed and are much more costly. In 2009, Qatar and the US want to build pipelines. Hosea 12:1. Ephraim feedeth on wind and followeth after the east wind. He daily increaseth lies and desolation, and they do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried into Egypt. The introduction to the Syrian Civil War. The king of the south, spheres of influence. Russia, Iran, Turkey, and Assad. Syria, you have ISIS. The king of the north is USA, Saudi Arabia, Kurdish rebels, and revolutionaries. And each of these groups are in the sphere of influence of the king of the south and the king of the north. They have to keep their allies. Turkey was a US ally, NATO. ISIS wants to defeat all of them. Sometimes fight rebels and what? Kurdish rebels, and Syria supplies them. Sometimes they fight Syria and Assad, and Saudi Arabia supports ISIS. They play one side off the other side. Russia supplies natural gas to Europe and Ukraine makes political decisions Russia doesn't like. Russia turns off the tap of natural gas to control. We see some of the same issues going on still.
Okay, yeah. Because that's
Syria,
that's very much involved in the issues today, because if someone makes the wrong move, Putin's going to pull the plug on their.
And it seemed like the United States was starting to, I think, have more influence over countries in Europe as far as whether they were willing to accept natural gas from Russia, because of recent events with Russia. Syria has Russia's only Navy base with direct access to the Mediterranean. Qatar has the largest US naval base in the area. For Qatar, allied with the United States, to supply natural gas to Europe, it would have to go through Syria, allied with Russia. Syria knows he's trying to bypass his ally. 2009, they no.
Supposed to be NO.
Oh, they say no. 2011, Iran makes a plan. Pipelines to go through Syria. They say yes. But the whole region is engulfed in a civil war. The United States kept telling all of them, don't, have anything to do with taking natural gas from Russia. But Germany was kind of going its own way at that time. But I think, Russia is starting to lose their, influence on the other countries because of, they're lining up against Ukraine, and that's starting to ignite a lot of, negative reactions from the rest of Europe, because they're kind of messing their game up by doing that. The internal path of this movement, beginning from 2012, we are going to continue that thought in 2016. Elder Parminder has taught one of the roles of parables, or what they can do for you, is show you information that's not easily seen. So what you can take, when you can take what is visible and you can compare and contrast it with what is less visible, you can understand both. So we began to understand the internal beginning in 2012. We found that in 2012, a message came from the UK and entered the USA. And that message was the message of time. And what that message was saying was that in 2014, we would experience our Sunday law. 2014 is a Sunday law that's predicted in 2012. It enters the USA, and what was the response? It is rejected. It's rejected by the leadership, by Elder Jeff, and those leaders that surrounded him at that time. We come to 2013, and what is the experience of the movement? In 2013, there's a battle developing and an internal struggle where enemies begin to show themselves. Hopefully, we're familiar with this history. Some of this discussion might be new to you. But for those of you who are new, time was first introduced to the movement in 2012. There were studies done in the UK. Those studies were shared with people in the USA. But the leadership and those messages were rejected. Time setting was described as fanaticism, and those studies were rejected, which is why time setting is such a new concept to many of us, but it has been a subject in the movement since 2012. The only thing that delayed it was our experience of it. And speaking personally of myself, I had no idea.
I don't think there's any of us here that did know about that. Maybe somebody here, but I don't think so.
I definitely wasn't one of them. And I did watch his 25-20 series back in the day, and somehow it just never jarred with me, maybe because Jeff never made anything of it. You know, nothing. There was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. Even in 2019, I was completely ignorant of until Elder Tess or Elder Preminder spilled the beans about it later in the year in 2019. But
yeah,
if I had known about some of the things that were going on, I would have made different decisions, personal decisions on my part. But I was completely ignorant. I wasn't down in Arkansas, and I wasn't, in on anything that was going on when it came to Jeff and Perminder and Tess and anything through that whole time period. All I knew is what was in the videos. And there was probably a lot of stuff I've seen online that Perminder had done throughout the 20-teens that I probably never saw because I was primarily following Jeff. Then 2013, and there were internal enemies. The main party, Path of the Just, had worked in step with Elder Jeff, and they were deeply opposed to the message of time setting. But by the time you get into 2013, they're not just opposing time setting. Now they're also fighting against Elder Jeff, but against the movement itself. Those enemies first began to show themselves in 2013. That conflict, up here, that conflict spread from 2013 into the early months of 2014, and it is in 2014 that they properly split, and Path of the Just leaves the movement. So it begins in 2013, but extends in the history of 2014. And in 2014, despite the rejection of leadership and despite the work of the enemies, 2014 is a Sunday law waymark for this movement, and we can find the opening up of Ezra 7:9. Remember it well. I think, yeah, I remember that whole thing. It's a successful waymark. It was not dependent upon the acceptance of the leadership. I mean, it was not prevented by internal discord, but it was a successful waymark. Then we began to discuss the external. We went back to 1989 and we introduced Nigel Oaks from the UK. In the company he's building, he begins in 1989 as a study group, the Behavioral Dynamics Working Group. They're going to study how to manipulate human behavior. Then he forms this into the Behavioral Dynamic Working Group, Behavioral Dynamics Institute in 1990. In 1993, it becomes a Strategic Communication Laboratory. Laboratory like something scientific, but here it's to study human behavior and how to manipulate it. And they're going to use the same techniques as Aristotle and Hitler. When we come to this history, the mechanism that leads to Donald Trump's campaign, the tool that is picked up in this history, 2014 to 2016, is using the exact same tactics as Hitler used to also come to power. And in our last study, we spent much of the time comparing our history to that of World War II, and Donald Trump and Hitler become the same person. It's ugly to say that, but it's prophetically accurate. He formed SCL. They began to work in war zones and then in foreign elections. They mostly worked in countries that had some type of difficulty with their media, where it was in some ways restricted. Because if there is a free press, it made it much harder to manipulate the public. They did not work in the West much in this time period. There is a list of countries where they did work. We know Kenya was a major one in 2 elections, but they began to work in the West and they gained the attention of the Republican Party. And that was in 2012. In 2012, there's a US election. Obama against Mitt Romney. Obama is a Democrat, a liberal. Romney was a Republican. Obama has ideas that we would consider to be very liberal, and some people would say immoral. So by the time you get to the history of 2012, the Republican Party particularly, and stations like Fox News are saying that Obama is at war with religion. He's waging a war against religion and Christianity. They become much more zealous at stopping him, much more determined to change the course of government in the USA. 2012, they failed to do that, and Obama was elected for a 2nd term. We read the quotes of Alexander Nix, the CEO, where he said that this victory for Obama in 2012 was the catalyst that allowed them to enter into the American market. So SCL enters the USA from where? The UK in 2012. Who is the government? Obama. He has just been reelected. Obama and his associates, the Democrats. Let's remember in 2001 in the Patriot Act. We haven't discussed the Patriot Act in any great detail, but it's something we're already aware of. In 2001, as a response to 9/11, George Bush brings in the Patriot Act 45 days after 9/11. And this was a restriction of civil liberty. It started on what they used the Patriot Act to do, was to take the private information of the American people and place it in massive databases. Particularly what they were collecting was phone records and everything done over the internet. So all the information that is put out from 1989, from 2001, the American government begins to collect and store. SCL formed Cambridge Analytica to participate in the election process in the United States. It entered the US market in 2012. It was involved in 44 US congressional, US Senate, and state level elections in the 2014 midterm elections. In 2015, it was disclosed that the company had entered the Republican Party presidential primaries for the 2016 election, primarily in support of Ted Cruz. California is heavily funded by hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer, a major supporter of Cruz. Is that right? And then Donald Trump, and is now under investigation by both the UK and US governments. The company has since been disbanded and was bought by Emmer Data Limited. Now I remember Elder Tess in one of her presentations about the future elections post 2020, mentioning Ted Cruz coming back in the picture. That's interesting. If they ever feel the need to find information about you, they can go into those records and find out who you called or emailed, everything you have ever written on social media, every website you ever visited, all in a massive government database. And to do that is a clear violation of the Constitution. Who was fighting that in 2001? Not everyone, but in 2001 to 2014, there's an ongoing war that sometimes dies down and sometimes rises up. But it's an ongoing struggle in the US government over the Patriot Act. It's primarily the Democrats who are opposing it from the beginning. This is George Bush, and he's a Republican, and his party was behind him. The USA Patriot Act, commonly known as the Patriot Act, is an act of the United States Congress that was signed into law by US President George Bush on October 26, 2001. The title of the act, wow, it's 20 years old. The title of the act is a contrived 3-letter initialism, USA, preceding a 7-letter acronym, Patriot, which in combination stand for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism, Act of 2001. The acronym was created by 23-year-old congressional staffer Chris Silk. In response to September 11 attacks and the 2001 anthrax attacks, Congress passed legislation to strengthen national security. On October 23, 2001, Republican Rep. Jim Sessenbrenner introduced HR 3162, incorporating provisions from a previously sponsored House bill, and a Senate bill also introduced earlier in the month. The next day, the act passed the House by a vote of 357 to 66, with Democrats comprising the overwhelming portion of dissent. The three Republicans voting no were Robert Ney of Ohio, Butch Otter of Idaho, and Ron Paul of Texas. On October 25, the act passed the Senate by 98 to 1 vote, the only dissident being Russ Feinberg of Wisconsin. Those opposing the law have criticized its authorization of indefinite detentions of immigrants, the permission given to law enforcement to search a home or a business without the owners or the occupants' consent or knowledge, the expanded use of national security letters, which allows the Federal Bureau of Investigation to search telephone, email, and financial records without a court order, and the expanded access of law enforcement agencies to business records, including library and financial records. Since its passage, several legal challenges have been brought against the act, and federal courts have ruled that a number of provisions are unconstitutional. Many of the act's provisions were to sunset beginning December 31, 2005, approximately 4 years after its passage. In the months preceding the sunset date, supporters of the act pushed to make its sunsetting provisions permanent, while critics sought to revise various sections to enhance civil liberty protections. In July 2005, the U.S. Senate passed a reauthorization bill with substantial changes to several of the act's sections, while the House reauthorization bill kept most of the act's original language. The two bills were then reconciled in a conference committee criticized by senators from both the Republican and Democratic parties for ignoring civil liberty concerns. The bill, which removed most of the changes from the Senate version, passed Congress on March 2, 2006, and was signed by President Bush on March 9 and 10 of that year. On May 26, 2011, President Barack Obama signed the Patriot Sunset Extension Act of 2011, a 4-year extension of 3 key provisions in the act: roving wiretaps, searches of business records, and conducting surveillance of lone wolves. Individuals suspected of terrorist-related activities not linked to terrorist groups. Following a lack of congressional approval, parts of the Patriot Act expired on June 1, 2015. With passing the USA Freedom Act on June 2, 2015, the expired parts were restored and renewed through 2019. However, Section 215 of the law was amended to stop the National Security Agency from continuing its mass phone data collection program. Instead, phone companies will retain the data, and the NSA can obtain information about targeted individuals with permission from a federal court. Oops. Oh boy. What happened here? Something. Okay. Okay, yeah, that was good. Okay. I clicked on something accidentally. But we come down into this history, and there's a Democrat, and they, for the most part, are opposed to the Patriot Act. Before Obama became involved in politics, what was his career? He was a constitutional lawyer. He knows that document well. And whatever failings he may have had, he knew what the Constitution said. So you do not have someone in power who's going to come to the Sunday law and violate that Constitution. There's an issue with this company. Who are they going to work through? They come from the UK into the USA, and can they access the government? No, they cannot work with Obama, the president. They cannot work with his associations, the Democrats. Instead, they begin to work with the Republican Party. Here's a list of key names that we need to look at when you have the time: Nigel Oaks, Steve Bannon, Chris Wiley, Alexander Nix. And I tried to find information on Nigel Oaks. Didn't find a whole lot. I don't know why. There's just Nigel Oaks began this process perhaps more than the others. In 2013, there's a problem. What happens? The Patriot Act was introduced in 2001. But there's someone working within the US defense who begins to turn against his government: Snowden. He is opposing two things. First, the Patriot Act, which is a violation of the Constitution. Now he's not just opposing the Patriot Act, now he's opposing the government, his leadership. So you have, oops. So you have the path of the just internal of the movement that begins to fight the message of time and the leadership. 2013, and you have a government contractor from within their own agencies who begins to oppose the Patriot Act, government surveillance in general. What he's opposing is government surveillance and control. And also, in this action, he's attacking the government. In 2013, Edward Snowden took a great deal of those government secret files and he created the largest leak known in history, beginning in 2013, extending into around the middle of 2014. June 2014. He's releasing government secrets, a direct attack on the government to such an extent that by 2014 and 2015, the FBI and NSA are facing lawsuits. And it was ruled that what they had done under the Patriot Act was illegal and a violation of the Constitution. This work of Snowden changed the internet as we know it. A report by Robert Mueller about Russian interference and the investigation of Trump's team was released in March of 2019. And in that report, what did Robert Mueller complain of? He said he could not investigate everything because the information that he wanted to access was encrypted, which means he can no longer access. So when information is encrypted, you would need someone who knows more information about computers than he did. But when information is encrypted, it's very difficult to access it. The reason why encryption was introduced, particularly into messaging services such as WhatsApp, was not to protect us from foreign actors or criminals. All of the encryption was introduced in this history of 2013. It was to hide information from the American government. Encryption was not introduced to protect criminals, but as a direct result of Edward Snowden to hide the information from the American government. It has completely changed, even down into our history, where Robert Mueller in their Russian investigation is finding that a roadblock. I wonder if it'll ever be unblocked. This was the largest leak of information known in history, and it created quite a struggle within the US government, a war inside the US government about what to do with this Patriot Act. Because Obama is opposing it, the Democrats are opposing it, even the Republicans who intentionally wrote the Patriot Act are fighting against it. And that's what happens over the course of 2014. So if we're going to see a violation of liberty, it's not going to come from the government. 2014, the government fighting the Patriot Act, they already have. And Obama is fighting as hard as he can in 2014 to have the Patriot Act amended, come back into line with the Constitution. He fails in that effort because of the opposition of the Republican Party. And in 2015, the Patriot Act is repealed and no longer exists. And now we're under the Freedom Act. It's a lot like the Patriot Act, but there are a few differences which make it harder for the government to access information. Okay. This is what is visibly happening, but under the surface, there is the work of the Republican Party and SCL elections. Particularly in 2013, SCL meets two people, Christopher Wiley and Steve Bannon, become involved in their work, especially noting Steve Bannon, who successfully brings this tool to the attention of some Republican donors, and they create the company Cambridge Analytica. And this is the company that is used and becomes the tool of the Republican Party to help elect Donald Trump. And in 2014, they do their work. It was a lot like what was done under the Patriot Act, but now it is not just collected and stored. Now they're using everything they learned from the studies they did in 1989. They used that information. So 2014, they took the personal information and data of tens of millions of Americans. They have said over 100 million. The exact number is not known, around 80 to 90 million. They formed that information into algorithms, and then they began to manipulate public opinion, all as a buildup of preparation for the 2016 election. They start creating phrases in 2014 designed to test the American public and see what kind of subject material creates an emotional response. Some of the phrases they began to say, build the wall. They send that out onto the internet, photos of immigrants, photos of walls, and they're testing the American public to see what types of messages would appeal to certain groups of people that they can use in the 2016 election. So in this history, you have two layers. You have internal and external, but in the external, you have two layers. A government that is visible, but then you also have the work of the Republican Party and the development of Cambridge Analytica. Let's summarize. In 2012, a message came from the UK to the USA, the message of time. It's rejected by the leadership, Elder Jeff, and those closely connected with him. In 2012, a company enters the US from the UK. It is directly opposed to Obama and the Democrats. The two are not able to be in agreement. They cannot work for the government. In 2013, you have the work of enemies, Path of the Just, internal to the movement, beginning to fight with the leadership. They have also opposed the message of time. In 2013, externally, you have the work of Edward Snowden, the largest leak of government data in history. He's fighting against government surveillance, but the Patriot Act in particularly, and he's fighting against the government. In 2014, internally, despite the rejection of leadership, the Sunday law for this movement and light has opened up on Ezra 7:9. In 2014, externally, it cannot go through the movement, or the government. This Sunday law cannot be passed by the government of the USA, but it has to come from another party. Beginning from the UK, they do a work under Cambridge Analytica. This work, which is a direct violation of the Constitution, is a tool developed for Trump's campaign. It begins in 2014 and then continues to be developed into the election of 2016. 2014 is also the beginning of the message, the beginning of the work known as the loud cry. Some people are saying or putting into the public record that there's mistakes built into this model. They are saying it is incorrect and that there is mistakes. But what is being suggested is that Elder Test placed the rejection of the leadership in 2013. And I know that I'm speaking to the camera as much as to all of you. I'm not sure who's watching, but I want to make it clear. I have never believed that. Therefore, I'm fairly convinced I have never taught that. The rejection of the leadership was 2012. When the message entered the USA, it did not lay dormant for a period of time, and it was not accepted and then rejected. It was rejected from the moment it entered. And I've always placed that entering in 2012. We come to the external, and 2012 is the election of Obama and the Democrats, who had a majority in that House. So while I am not placing the rejection of that message in 2013, I am placing it in 2012, which is what I've done from the beginning. I'm not sure why people have twisted that. Perhaps they have misunderstood the board work. I have highlighted 2013 because where you see the work of enemies, you also know that the government itself is opposed. So I could see Obama defending the Constitution in 2013 and opposed to the Sunday law, but he did that in 2008, 2009, 2011. He did that all through his history, just the way time was never accepted in 2012 or 2013 or back in the history prior in this board work. It's not something you just need to pin to a date, but it was the whole of that history. So I've never taught or ever believed that the rejection of leadership was in 2013. Rejection was in 2012. And we should know that, not because it's what I said, but because that is what the parable teaches, that it's this message, it's SCL, that comes from the UK to the USA in 2012. So even if I had said 2013, the mistake would have been mine, not with the message. The parable is clear, it marks 2012. What we mark in 2013 is the work of the enemies. Path of the Just and Edward Snowden. We're also noting in 2013, the leadership was still not in agreement, just like it was for the history prior and the history in the future. So I want to correct that misunderstanding. The rejection of the leadership is in 2012. That's what has always been taught. But despite anything I have to say, that's what the parable teaches. 2012, the rejection, 2013, the work of enemies, 2014, a successful waymark. Despite those difficulties that message had to overcome, it is the waymark of Sunday law for this movement. The end.
Hopefully everybody kept up with that. Good. And these notes are all, I think I sent them out. I didn't send them out yesterday, sorry. But I sent them out. So you have the notes, you can go back and review, because each piece of this, remember what we talked about like last night with the study is applying ourselves to understand, and it comes from our efforts as well. So so I would be, and I have been for all of us, asking the Lord to bless every one of our efforts, help us to put more and more effort in. And as we look at each piece, because that's, when you think about Ezekiel and the wheels within wheels, there's all these pieces, and the Midnight Cry brought in all these pieces, and they were these scattered pieces of information that individually we may have understood to some extent, but each of these pieces have to come together to form the overall whole picture of what is happening, to help us to be able to be equipped to better teach this message to the Levites and the Nethinims. So you have the notes, typos and all, you have the notes to go back and do any kind of review wherever it is you feel you're weak, so that we can understand the broad picture of what is happening, what has been happening, and what's going to happen. Linda, I thank you for going through both of those like that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's interesting.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to ask, I mean, it was a quick review, but does anybody have any questions? Are there things in particular, and if you don't want to say publicly, then say privately, and let's try and talk about it and steer you, direct you, maybe where you can help, where it can be helpful for you in your growth and understanding and readiness.
Yeah, I remember Elder Tess telling us to look up information on Nigel Oaks and the other person. There was another guy, the guys who were involved in the very beginning in 1989. And I would look up information on the internet, and there just wasn't much there. Other than what she already pointed out.
Yeah, I don't know if it was this one, I guess not, but she goes into them more elsewhere, but showing that, tracing their history, but what led up to the manipulation, where they worked in other countries successfully, but they were not able to work here successfully because the government would be in the way. So
Yeah.
what you wound up with, and I can't remember the incident that happened, but anyways, what you wind up with is them working with the Republican Party to put things in place to manipulate the people of the United States when it came to the vote that was coming in 2016. So it was a mind game thing, a manipulation of the mind, information war, to bring about the election of Donald Trump. And really, when you want to think of it from the big picture, that what they did was playing a role in not that it's been going on since 1989, but what they did really in a quick fashion played a role in really bringing out this division. The division of the two parties had always been there, but bringing out, how do you say, like, to me, Donald Trump was like, gave him from his whole, everything he stood for was like giving people permission to express what's in their heart. And that brought the two sides side by side to where you can compare and contrast. The people could compare and contrast, bring them together, the juxtaposition to where people could, people with a decent heart would look at that and be disgusted. And people that, I don't know how to say, people that like it makes me think of the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament. The difference is that people believe that there's a difference between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, because the God of the New Testament, and I've said this before, was this gentle, kind, meek, humble, and people view the God of the Old Testament as this mean, wicked tyrant. But what we see in the Republican Party, when you really pull back the scope, is what they like is that wicked tyrant God. They like that apis bull. They like that tyrant that avenges his enemies. And that's the role that they play when you go back into the Covenanters, how they believe that they're the true church and to rule his kingdom. And you tie that all in with what Brendan said about the prototype, and they've got to protect I'm kind of rambly, but I don't know if that's helping at all, because I kind of went many directions with that. But there's like the fine details, and the fine details help us to understand the bigger picture. Let's just put it that way. In these studies, there are a lot of the fine details to eventually help us to understand. So it's my prayer that we really apply ourselves in every moment. And I know that we've said this before, when you're in the car driving, you know, I mean, I don't want to say, Elder Tess talks about people, you know, speeding things up, and I'm not talking about doing that, but if we do work, we have to work, or whatever it is we have to do, maximize your time. I mean, if you, and I don't do it because of my own salvation. I do it because God called us. If he called us, then he can fit us up, but we have to do our part. I want to do it because he wants to save the Levites and the Nethinims. I want to do it because he called us to help and work with him in this. And if that's our priority, then everything else will coincide with that desire. And anyway, so yeah, that was kind of rambling, sorry. But if you have any concerns about things you don't understand and you don't want to say it publicly, then reach out to myself or Elder Shaquetta or Aaron. Reach out to any of us, and we will try our best to work out whether you get some one-on-one studies with Aaron, however we work it out. But don't hesitate to, because you're maybe intimidated by so much information. We're in this together, and let's work on it. So would somebody like to close in prayer?
I can close it in.
Okay.
We thank you, most holy and merciful God, for this blessing that you put before us. We pray that we can internalize it so that we may see what is coming and do what your will needs to be done. We thank you for your holy presence today. Thank you for the presentation and the blessing that Linda presented. We thank you for all that you do, holy God. And pray all this in your holy and mighty name. In the name of Yeshua. Amen.
Amen.